Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on YouTube. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. All right, let's talk some Hard Knocks. Let's talk episode 3 of Hard Knocks off season with your New York Giants, and here to help me break this down as he has the last couple of weeks is Big Blue Views Tony DelGenio. Morning, Tony. How are you?
I'm fine, Ed. How are you doing?
I'm good. Just as we get started here, just a quick word of warning for anyone who might be listening to us as we live stream the show here. I'm up at our summer camp. All the grandkids are here. The dogs are here. So if we see people running by, or if you hear a bunch of noise, don't be surprised. I've tried to chisel out some quiet time, but with 4 years, with a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old here, who knows what's going to happen? So let's get into last night's episode, and I want to start at the end. I want to start with the teaser for next week, with the revelation that Brian Daboll was in favor of the possibility of trading up for Jayden Daniels. I just think, first of all, I think it's interesting that he was in favor of Daniels, and I think it's further evidence that under the right circumstances, had the Giants been able to get to 3, they would have gone and tried to get their quarterback of the future. Just your thoughts on the Daniels revelation, Tony.
Yeah, I agree. And I can't say it's that big a surprise to me that they would be interested in doing that, because Daniels had a very impressive year last year. And we already know, or before seeing that, how much they like Neighbors. I mean, even if you don't realize that they drafted him, you realize that they like him on the first 2 episodes of Hard Knocks, and so you know how much film they've watched. You heard Brian Daboll saying he spent all day watching Neighbors. Well, if he spent all day watching Neighbors, guess who's throwing the ball to Neighbors on all that film that he's watching? So, and he's not saying, oh, I love Neighbors. It's too bad he didn't have somebody good throwing to him. Yeah, he knows that Jayden Daniels had a terrific year throwing to him and Brian Thomas, right? And so I guess it tells me that they have a very pragmatic attitude toward building the team, and that is that they like Daniel Jones enough for Shane to offer him a 4-year contract, albeit one that they can get out of after 2 years. And so there's always that opt out in there, but their number one job is to win a Super Bowl. And so if they decide that they could get someone who's potentially an upgrade to Jones, then they're willing to use resources to do it. Now, what we don't know yet is how much in the way of resources they might have been willing to give up to do it, right? Carolina a couple of years ago was willing to give up a lot in order to get to number 1, to take Bryce Young. The Cleveland Browns were willing to give up a lot a few years ago to get Deshaun Watson. We don't know what kind of an offer the Giants tried to make to New England. I assume is the team that they were trying to trade with. I assume that they wouldn't even consider trading up with Washington. That Washington would never even consider the possibility of trading in division, especially when they needed a quarterback themselves. But I think it shows that if they see the chance to upgrade, then they'll take it, and they recognize that Jones is not the second coming of Patrick Mahomes. They may think that he can be better than what they've seen so far, and I bet they do think that they can make him better than what they've seen so far. But better than what they've seen and good enough to win a Super Bowl are not necessarily the same thing. And so if they see a chance maybe to go for a Super Bowl caliber quarterback, which they may consider either May or Daniels to be, then they're willing to try to do it at least up to some point. And up to what point, we'll find out presumably next week or the week after.
Right. We knew that they were willing to go and make that move for Drake May because it was clear, once we got closer to the draft, it was clear that Jayden Daniels wasn't going to be an option. Washington was going to stick at 2, and Washington was going to take Jayden Daniels. So, all of the chatter was about the Giants, about Drake May being the guy. And so, what we learned last night was that I think the Giants, in the right circumstance, would have made that move for either of those two players, and I found that really interesting. In lieu of that, it's been clear through all of these episodes that as much as they admired Roma Dunze, as much as Hannah Burnett, the area scout, said he's everything the Giants want, smart, tough, dependable, everything you want, was her exact quote. It was clear that the guy Brian Dable was in love with was Malik Neighbors. And it was clear that he would be the guy, if they didn't get a quarterback. So really, really interesting stuff. And I'm like you are, I'm anxious to find out how close they came. Obviously, they're talking to John Mara about this deal. So obviously there were very serious discussions about making it. And I'm interested to see how close they came and ultimately, why New England said no.
Yeah, John Mara said that I guess he'd have palpitations. I think that's what he said last
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
episode
Yeah.
last night.
Very, very interesting. And I want to get to something else that John Mara said last night eventually. But to do that, we need to begin to talk about the Saquon Barkley section of last night's show. And we saw the culmination of the Giants walking away from Saquon Barkley. And I need to make something clear, because even in the comments I've seen on social media and in the comments that I've seen at Big Blue View so far, after posting the takeaways from the episode, in my view, yes, Joe Shane said to Ed Berry, Barkley's agent, he said, if I offer him, 12 and a half annually, 25 million, guaranteed over 3 years, if I offer him that, he'd be a Giant. Joe Shane never actually offered that, never actually made that offer. He said, if I did, would he sign that and be a Giant? But there was never an offer made. And when Ed Berry came back and said the price has gone up from what I told you before, excuse me, Joe simply said, we're not going to go there. We're out. Yeah. So I think there's a little bit of a misinterpretation by some people of what Joe Shane said to Ed Berry. There was never an offer made.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And to me, I think what last night's episode showed was how Joe Shane really feels about running backs. Not that it's any kind of news, but I couldn't help but contrast his reaction to what he would have to pay the other free agents that he did sign. So John Runyon, the Jets have offered him $9 million. We're going to have to offer him another $1 million. Sure, do it. Yep, they got him. Okay. Jermaine Illuminor, we want him for $6 million. Illuminor wants $7 million, or else he's going to go to the Cardinals. Okay, offer him $7 million. We want it for 3 years. He only wants 2 years. Okay, well, we'll do it for 2 years. Yeah, so they're willing to do. Now, naturally, you're not seeing everything that's going on. You're seeing the things that HBO chooses to show you. But the impression you get is that for those guys, and for that matter, Brian Burns, what's it going to take to sign Burns? Probably 28. It's like, okay, we'll go 28. And so you look at how seemingly easy it is for them to go beyond their target for what they wanted to spend on these players. and to go up another million or to go up to a very, high amount in order to get them. Yet in Barkley's case, we're talking about, I think, what Shane having offered, was it 12.3 million at the break a year and a half ago, that Barkley and his previous agent turned down, and now we're niggling over 12.5 versus 12.75 million dollars per year. And it's like, are we really going to make it or break it based on a number that's much less than $1 million a year, when for these other guys, sure, we'll go up $1 million at the drop of a hat as soon as you hear that's what we need to do to sign him. So it's telling me, that it's telling me that on Shane's side, he really was not that crazy about the idea of bringing Barkley back, thinking of how much cap space it would take up for him. And Barkley, for his part, wasn't that crazy about staying a Giant either, or else he wouldn't have let the Eagles sign him for so much little more than what he could have gotten from the Giants.
Absolutely. I think if you've been paying attention, you've understood Joe Shane's priorities ever since the beginning. I mean, he's been asked at various press conferences about teams drafting running backs in the first round, and his basic answer to that has been, that's their decision, and basically saying, I don't see the value in doing that. His philosophy all along was he needed that money to go out and get 2 starting offensive linemen. He needed that money. And if he signs Barkley, as he told John Mara, if he signs Barkley, he can't do that. So his philosophy has always been, he's very much a positional value type general manager, more modern philosophy. Sometimes I disagree with what positions should be valued and which ones shouldn't be valued, but I get the way the NFL operates, and Joe is very much, in that modern vein, and we saw confirmation of that, throughout these few episodes. So I'm not surprised at all that you're looking at, Xavier McKinney's another example. Again, as he said at one point during the episode, reading a text, he said, protect the quarterback, get after, protect the quarterback on one side, get after the quarterback on the other side. And that's how he wants to build the thing, from the inside out, which is the philosophy that I have always advocated. Build it from the inside out. Your weapons, your playmakers, they're not as valuable if you can't block and you can't rush the passer.
Yeah. And the other thing, that we always have to keep in mind in these situations, and you can, there are pros and cons, is, why was Howie Roseman able to get Saquon and Joe Shane wasn't? And the answer is because Howie Roseman is always willing to backload contracts with lots of void year money. And I should have looked it up before we got on, but I think Saquon's contract from Philadelphia has maybe $19 million of it in void years. I could be wrong about that, but there's some, I think, substantial amount of it in void years, and that's someplace that Shane doesn't want to have to go with the Giants unless he's forced to. He does have a certain amount of stuff in void years, but he doesn't want to build up a lot of costs in void years. And so it's a very big difference in philosophy between the two GMs. And partly I think that's just Howie Roseman's nature, but partly it's because Howie Roseman correctly sees his team as being right in the middle of their Super Bowl window, and he'll do anything he can, including defer costs, far into the future, in order to get anyone that he needs. Most people would say, you're crazy with all the other talent on that team to go after an expensive running back. But again, from his standpoint, I'm sure he's saying, well, that's just one extra weapon to make it more likely that our offense is unstoppable and get us the Super Bowl we've been trying to get for the last few years.
Right. Just for the record, there is $19.3 million in void money over 4 years from 2027 to 2030 for Barkley. All of that, if the Eagles void that contract, or as they will void that contract, all of that rolls into their 2027 salary cap. And I've said it again and again. The Eagles did the right thing based on where they are. The Giants also did the right thing based on where they are and on what they had to do.
Yeah, and I think, and that's an important point to always remember in these things, is that I think we tend to judge every specific transaction or whatever in terms of winners and losers. And it doesn't always have to be winners and losers. It could be winners and winners, or losers and losers, right? And so in this case, yeah, I agree with you. I think Shane was right to do that. He clearly didn't have the enthusiasm to keep Barkley. And it's clear, as you say, that the Giants want to move towards a more pass-oriented offense, which is modern thinking about how you win in the NFL. But Howie Roseman is right too in saying, look, if I can add another piece that makes it a little bit more likely that I get that Super Bowl this time around, then that's worth doing as well. So both of them can be right in what they do, just as both the Giants and Barkley can be right in what they decided to do and not to do.
Absolutely. Tony, the other interesting part of the Barkley thing for me was at the very end, as they're watching television, and the Barkley, and the NFL Network and all that is talking about the Barkley thing, and John Mara and pro personnel director Chris Rossetti are sitting in Shane's office. Rossetti's reading out the final numbers of Barkley's deal. And there was a little bit of disbelief, I think, at the fact that the Eagles gave him a deal that could reach $46 million if he hits all of the incentives. And Joe Shane said, we're going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And we know how much John Mara loved Saquon Barkley. We know, as he had said earlier in the episode, he was going to have a hard time sleeping if Barkley went to Philly. We know that John Mara didn't want to see Saquon Barkley leave, just like years ago he didn't want to see Odell Beckham leave. Just like he's very loyal to Daniel Jones, and he has his, he to a fault, like his father was overly loyal to certain players. To a fault, sometimes, Mara gets attached to some of these guys, and he gets attached to how popular they are with the fan base and all of that. But I found it very interesting. And I'll be honest, I had to listen to this part of the show about 10 times before I was sure what John Mara said. And look, I have old ears, so maybe that's part of why I had to listen. But I checked with a couple of other Giants writers as well. And what John Mara said after Joe Shane said we're going to be fine, he said, I think we are too.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that interesting. He's like, okay, we have a plan. This is what we want to do. This is how we're building this team. And I thought he'd be more upset, than the show showed him to be. So the Giants are just like, okay, he moved on. Here we go. Let's build this team the way we want to build it and go from there.
Yeah, and for all the John Mara conspiracy theorists, out there that he's the one kind of pulling the strings and calling the shots on personnel moves and things like that. I think you have to differentiate between a meddling owner who's kind of forcing his team to do things that they don't want to do, and an owner who's not an absentee owner, an owner who actually cares at a very deep level about the team and about the players that they bring in and forms an attachment with them. And it's clear that's the kind of owner that John Mara is. And so, it's not surprising that an owner like that is going to be emotional when a player who's been there and been such an important part of the team for, what is it, 5 years, decides to leave. And yeah, you form an emotional attachment, especially when that player's been a good player, right? I mean, this is not Sam Beal that they're getting rid of.
Oh, geez.
It's not
a Sam Beal reference. Good Lord.
I could make Darius
gotta,
or something.
gotta love it.
These are
gotta
players that he formed an emotional attachment to. And good for him that he feels that way, but also good for him that he's just kind of like in a little bit of a therapy session with Joe Shane to kind of voice how sad he is that this is happening. But he's also not saying, don't do it.
He's not berating Jones or berating Joe Shane as to how did you let this happen?
Right.
He's just saying, okay.
Or
all right.
Or this better work, or someone's going to.
Right? He's not giving him that. He's just like, okay, we'll be fine. Let's go. We'll be fine. Let's do the rest of what we need to do.
And Shane, for his part, understands that and is willing to make, the difficult decision. And I'm sure Shane knows that Mara is going to be disappointed that Barkley's not coming back, because by this time he has to know Mara well enough to know how Mara feels about Barkley.
Yeah, and in the end, whether it's 2 years down the road or whatever, in the end, if Joe and Brian Daboll don't get this right, no matter who the players are, whether it's Daniel Jones at quarterback or Carson Beck at quarterback or whoever it ends up being at quarterback, and however they plug the running back, position, if they don't get it right and win enough football games, they're going to lose their jobs. They know that. And I have always said that I think it's the right thing for John Mara and Giants ownership to do. It's their fate that they have in their hands. So let them decide their own fate with their own decisions. So I like that idea. Tony, let's turn to the rest of free agency. And I thought we saw some fascinating things last night. I thought we saw, to me, it was insightful to see how much Joe Shane depended on a couple of the key staff members that he has to do the negotiations, to mine the information that the Giants needed to make those decisions. Kevin Abrams in particular, who was assistant GM, under Dave Gettleman and now has a different title. Ed Triggs, who's another staff member. I just thought it was very, very interesting to see how much he relied on those guys, to see how much the Giants, that Joe bounced things off assistant GM Brandon Brown and sort of depended on his opinion. It was also insightful to see how much that information changed, what the Giants wanted to do. And they said, okay, we thought it would take this, but we've got to stretch to that. And we really want this player. So we do what we have to do. But I thought just the process and all of that, I thought was even more so than the players that they signed. I thought getting a glimpse at the process, and how one decision impacts another was very insightful.
Yeah, and I think one part of that is that Shane's staff there in the front office is a mixture of the guys that are the people. I shouldn't say the guys, right? Because the Giants have plenty of women in fairly high front office positions. The Giants have been really good about that, and they're a mix of people that Joe Shane brought in himself and people who were left over, including some people like Abrams, who were contenders for the GM position itself. And so there's this kind of potentially uneasy mix between the old regime and the new regime in the front office. But, I think, as you said, for the first time last night, we are saying that that those guys, Abrams, Ed Triggs, right, are playing important roles. They're not the ones deciding on which players, right, but they're the ones working out all of the contract stuff and so on and so forth. So they still have a very important role to play. And in fact, Abrams has played that role ever since. I think he got to the Giants even when Gettleman was there in terms of structuring contracts and things like that. And so yeah, it's kind of nice to see the whole dynamic that yeah, they're all there in the room, but these guys are doing some kind of job, and then these other people are doing this other kind of job. I'm also very interested to see Brandon Brown, and I've been curious about learning more about Brandon Brown, because you learn very little from these press conferences they give during camp and things like that. I mean, you can tell that Brandon Brown has a good head on his shoulders, and he's a good talker, and he presents a good face. But you're wondering, like, well, what role is he actually playing inside the organization? The second in command to the leader can be someone who's a close confidant, someone who does very important work, or it can be someone like the vice president of the United States, where depending on what the president thinks of the vice president, the president either gives that person a lot of important stuff to do, or makes it just a ceremonial role where all they do is preside over the Senate and go and go to events and stuff like that. And so it seems to me that Brandon Brown has, at least by this time, become, I kind of want to say, like, the big picture guy for the Giants, because he's the one who, in the middle of all the detailed discussions about, well, if we have to go up another $1 million to get this guy, or we're going to have to give up this in order to sign Brian Burns and trade for him and so on and so forth, and he's the one who's listening to all the commentary and then kind of like summing up everything and saying, here's the situation. We said we wanted to do this, and this. We need to do this, and this guy is this, he's this, and this guy solves this problem for it and gets us to where we said we wanted to get at the beginning of free agency. He said, you wanted to come out of free agency with two players. Two offensive linemen,
right?
Two offensive linemen. Here's the chance to do it by going up $1 million on each of these two guys.
Right.
We can reach that goal that we set at the beginning of free agency.
Right.
So,
and the opportunity to get, two of the three players who we went into here targeting as our favorites, as our guys that we wanted. I thought, he was the one who reminded Joe, you can't let $1 million. You can't let $1 million stop us from reaching, from reaching one of the objectives that we set out to fulfill.
Right. That's right. And so I think that kind of perspective is a very valuable one to have, because I think people can get lost in the gory details, and you have your principles, and you're not going to be forced into giving a player this much more than what you thought he was worth, and so on and so forth. But at some point you need somebody to say, look, this is how we get to the finish line of where we said we wanted to be in free agency. And so I think that's a pretty valuable perspective to have there in the front office. You need someone else who can remind you this is what the goal was, and it's sitting in front of us how we can get to that goal.
Absolutely.
So why not do it?
I also thought it was very interesting to learn. First we learned that the third offensive lineman, the guy they made the biggest offer to, which was nowhere near the ballpark of what he actually got in the end, was Robert Hunt.
That's right.
But the thing that I found fascinating was he wasn't the biggest ticket item. He wasn't, the top rated guy on anybody's board except for the New York Giants. I thought it was fascinating to me that Shane said the guy that they, and I think he was talking about the Giants pro personnel department, they have him rated as the top as the top free agent. He's their top guy on their board, and I think I
Top
found that
their top effing guy.
yes. I thought that was fascinating,
Yep.
and I think that's not based purely on talent. That has to be based on his relationship with offensive line coach Carmen Brasillo. That had to be based on the fact that he could fill either of two positions of need for the Giants. I just found it fascinating that when push came to shove, Illuminor was their must-have guy.
Yep, and yeah, for exactly the reasons that you mentioned, and $7 million a year by pro football standards.
Right.
I don't want to say
Right.
that's not much money. A lot of money by my standards, but not much money by football standards.
Right.
And again, you see how much Hunt got.
Right.
And is Hunt a better guard than Illuminor? Probably. But Illuminor is a good guard and has been a good tackle too. And so you're paying much less money to get him. And he seems like a great guy too. I mean, if his Twitter presence is any indication, he seems like a great guy to have in the locker room.
I mean, in the end, Tony, the Giants got 2 starting offensive linemen, solid starting offensive linemen, maybe not all pro offensive linemen, but they got two solid offensive linemen. And if you want to throw this in just for good measure, they got a starting running back, probably for less in terms of APY than Robert Hunt got from, I think it was from the Panthers.
Yeah.
So, and that's, that's pretty good work when you're getting, you may not get the absolute top guy, but you're getting 3 pretty good players. So that's pretty good work. As Joe Shane's youngest daughter said, good work today, Daddy.
He's got to worry though about her growing up. She's going to see how he's throwing millions of dollars around all the time.
Where's my millions, Daddy? Oh. Now where's that car that I want, Daddy? Yeah, so that was interesting. I mean, it was also, I thought we also cleared up something else last night. At least from what we saw in the show, there was a lot of talk about the Giants telling Drew Lock that he was in competition for the starting job and this and that. And I think we got clarification last night, which, Drew Lock had said this himself, that that's not what he was told. And that was the indication that we got last night, that the Giants and Drew Lock recognize that with the situation, with Daniel Jones' injury history, with where they are, there's an opportunity that Lock will get some playing time this year. But they sold him on the idea that when Brian Daboll coached Mitch Trubisky in Buffalo, that Trubisky ended up getting a big paycheck, as when Trubisky was the backup there. And Tyrod Taylor just got a big paycheck after backing up with the Giants for 2 years. So they sold him on the opportunity that there might be some playing time and that he might be able to earn an even bigger paycheck down the road. Not on the fact that you're coming in here to compete for the starting job week 1.
Yeah. And I mean, and Locke, by all indication, seems to be okay with that. He might feel that he's just biding his time and pocketing $5 million while he waits, and he'll get another chance at some point. And the one thing I did want to say about the quarterback situation is why is Drew Lock there? And the answer is because they weren't able to re-sign Tyrod Taylor, and Tyrod Taylor didn't take all that much money to go to the Jets. And
he did. I mean, his contract with incentives could reach $18 million, which the Giants weren't going to get to. But yeah, he didn't. If you look at it, Joe Shane said the Giants were willing to go to 7, and he took 8.5. So I mean, there's a difference. But what I found interesting, Tony, was Tyrod Taylor wasn't thrilled about the way things went down last year for the Giants.
That's the point I was going to make.
I found it interesting that, because the Giants, when they could have handed him back his job, they kept playing Tommy DeVito. They didn't, and Tyrod Taylor wasn't thrilled about that, because when push comes to shove, he's a better quarterback than Tommy DeVito. And I know with DeVito mania and all that, there's some people who don't want to hear it, but everybody in that locker room knew who the better quarterback was. And I found it interesting that the Giants thought Tyrod Taylor would come back, because I never thought he would come back. Not in a million years. I never thought he would even consider coming back to the Giants the way things went down last year.
Yeah, and that's really that was the point I wanted to get around to, is that I think there's something that, and I'm not sure how much it's partly Joe Shane, it's partly Brian Daboll, but something that I think they have to learn that perhaps they hadn't learned yet is that, these are human beings that they're dealing with, and they're not just pieces on a chessboard that you move around. You think about the Barkley situation, and I'm convinced that part of Barkley's ultimate decision is that he was genuinely hurt by how he was treated in contract negotiations going back 2 years now by the Giants, and as you said, Tyrod Taylor clearly was not pleased with not being put back in the starting lineup once he had healed from his injury. And so I get the feeling that neither Daboll nor Shane necessarily take those things into account. And I'm not saying it should change their decisions about what they do. That's a higher level question that I'm probably not qualified to answer, but I don't know that they anticipate sometimes that the guys that they have quote unquote disrespected in one way or another aren't going to remember that and make a decision in the end that will reflect their emotional feelings rather than just the pure financial professional numbers aspect of things. And you do have to keep that in mind with players.
Absolutely. There's a certain amount of, there's a human element, and there's got to be in any consideration, in your life, in my life, there's always consideration about, how was I treated here? How do I actually feel about these people? And that was part of Barkley's decision, part of Tyrod Taylor's decision, might have been part of Xavier McKinney's decision, all of those things. So, so you're right. It has to be part of the consideration. I was just very surprised that they actually felt like Tyrod would come back. Tony, I need to ask you, just for some thoughts. We saw the culmination of the Brian Burns trade, lots of sweaty palms as they waited and waited and waited for Dan Morgan to call Joe Shane back with an answer. Just your thoughts on what you might have learned during the whole negotiation with Carolina for Brian Burns.
So the things that I learned are that well, first of all, from the GM side of things, it's just really fascinating to see how all these negotiations take place, and Dan Morgan, is that the name, right?
Yes.
The Carolina GM, trying to hit him up for an extra 7th round draft pick when they
can we squeeze a, it was kind of obvious that David Tepper had said yes to the trade, but if you can squeeze him for a tiny bit more, go right ahead.
So I find things like that to be pretty funny, because I mean, in the larger scheme of things, 7th round draft picks mean almost nothing. I mean, they for every, you say, oh, what about Brock Purdy? Well, Brock Purdy is 1 in 1,000 or something like that, a guy who actually becomes a really important player as a 7th round draft pick. And you do get 1 or 2 of those every year in the draft, but the vast majority of 7th round picks never stick in the NFL, or at best they become a special teams player or something like that. So I find it funny when they're trying to negotiate over a seventh round pick. And the other thing though is that why did this deal get done? Well, it sure didn't hurt that Joe Shane apparently goes way back with Morgan, and so people that you already have a personal relationship, you deal with probably a lot more easily and maybe a lot more often than you do otherwise. I mean, clearly, Shane is okay dealing with Brandon Beane, right? And they've already made a couple of transactions since he's moved to the Giants, and so on. And so if you're going to be in that business, the personal relationships, I think, mean a lot to your ability then to do business later on. And that's something that Shane clearly seems to have with a number of people, not necessarily everyone, but a number of people. And that's something that I suspect maybe Dave Gettleman did not have so much of, because he didn't strike me from the outside as the type of guy who did a lot of glad handing and becoming buddies with a lot of different people and so on. I could be wrong about that, but it's
no, I think you're right. Actually,
part of that job that I think maybe is underappreciated by those of us who are on the outside.
I also thought it was interesting because, as we found out, Morgan and Joe Shane go back to right around 2000 when Morgan was a rookie player in Carolina. Shane was a beginning scout in Carolina. Their families have become friends. Their wives are friends. Their daughters are friends. So they vacation together at times, as the families vacation together. I thought the whole interaction of the fact that they're involved in this high stakes negotiation and the families are discussing it and and kind of involved in it and had feelings about it. I thought that was kind of fascinating, because it wasn't just the two GMs. It was like involving two whole families to get this done.
Yeah, and all of these things going on behind the scenes, I think we have no idea of, or we draw conclusions from little bits of information that we shouldn't draw too many conclusions from. So as you say, watching the back and forth and how these deals actually wind up coming together is kind of a fascinating thing. The other thing, though, circling back to the topic that you raised at the very beginning today, Jayden Daniels. Well, what were we saying a week ago? A week ago, after episode 2 of Hard Knocks, we were saying that Dabols didn't like Jayden Daniels because he asked him a question about that formation and what he would do. What is he going to call and so on.
And he didn't answer it very well.
And he didn't. Right. All he could say is, "Oh, I throw a touchdown." And Dabols chuckled and said, "Okay, I like that answer." But everybody concluded that, he doesn't think Jayden Daniels is smart enough to run his offense or something like that. But Drake May aced that question during his interview, and so that's why they're going for May and not for Daniels. But this week we find out that when Shane asks Brian Daboll, "What would you think about trading up for Jayden Daniels?" and Brian Daboll says, "Yes."
Yeah, I would, very emphatically. You're right in, it's very dangerous in all walks of life to form a hard and fast conclusion based off of one tiny snippet of information.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, a week ago we would have thought, Daboll, the Giants aren't going to look at Jayden Daniels as a guy who can process their offense quickly enough. And this week we find out that the head coach would have been all in favor of going all in to get the kid. So it's little bits of information can be deceiving. So, and even we are not getting every bit of negotiation that takes place in these Hard Knocks episodes. We are getting a somewhat sanitized version. We're not getting every conversation but we're learning a good bit about who's important in the organization, about how these things get done, about how these guys approach their business, and in the end, it's a fascinating look at how some of this business gets done, during an NFL offseason.
Yeah, and judging by things that I've seen on Twitter from a variety of places, I mean, obviously, if you're a Giants fan, you're fascinated to watch what's going on here. So that's clear. There's no question that Giants fans are going to really love seeing this little peek at what's going on inside. But I'm seeing a lot of commentary on Twitter from just other NFL people and other NFL fans who have nothing to do with the Giants. And they're all saying they think that this is the best Hard Knocks that they've ever seen. And I think they're really appreciating, as you say, this peek into really what's going on and
into how a franchise really runs,
how a football franchise really works. And so I think we're getting some pretty fascinating information from this, regardless of whether you're a Giants fan or not. But if you're a Giants fan, all the better. I mean, it's just, this stuff is just gold, I think, if you're a Giants fan.
Absolutely. All right, Tony. I think that's a good place for us to end. My grandkids are out. My grandkids are out in the lake, and maybe it's time for me to go join them.
Can I say just one thing before we leave? I see a comment in the window that's been there for a while talking about Jason Hurts making $6.1 million this year. I just wanted to address that. Jason Hurts's cap. Jalen Hurts, excuse me. Jalen Hurts' cap hit was $6.1 million last year. It's $13.5 million this year, but that's not how much he's making. Jalen Hurts, by the end of this season, will have been paid potentially more than $100 million by the Eagles. It's just that he has these very small cap hits because the Eagles GM, Howie Roseman, pushes all the costs far into the future with these void year costs. So that's how it's working. Jalen Hurts is making a lot more money last year and this year than Daniel Jones is. It's just that Joe Schoen is choosing to pay Daniel Jones's costs up front, while Howie Roseman is choosing to pay Jalen Hurts' costs far down the line. So it's not as if Jalen Hurts is cheaper than Daniel Jones is. He's more expensive.
And something else to remember is that all of this stuff, cash and cap, are two different things.
Yeah. Because
cap, a lot of these signing bonuses and things like that are paid up front. They're paid at signing. They're paid initially. So the cash that these guys have in their pocket doesn't match the numbers that you may see as far as cap hits, et cetera, in a contract, because that's just how the numbers are spread around for accounting purposes.
That's right. Yeah. Jalen Hurts' cap hit in 2029 is going to be 97.55.
Oh, yikes. Good luck with that, Eagles.
And because you know that Howie Roseman will do something with that. He won't actually pay that amount of money out, right?
Absolutely. All right, Tony. I think that's a good place for us to end, Giants fans. I hope you've enjoyed our little look at episode 3 of Hard Knocks. Thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.